Amy Jacobson, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Amy, we've already had a ton of fun, and I can't wait for even more of it as we get a chance to talk about your book, The Emotional Intelligence Advantage Mastering Change and Difficult Conversations. Before we get to that, though, Amy, we'd love to know a little bit more about you. Whereabouts did you grow up, and how did your upbringing help contribute to who you've become?
So I'm from Australia, which is a beautiful part of the world. And currently I live on the West Coast, which is in Perth, which is capital city of Western Australia, for those who haven't been here. I did grow up though on the East Coast of Australia, so always been based here, but very much traveled around Australia. So I've lived in majority of the states in Australia and absolutely love it here. So I guess I'm a bit of a wanderer. We do get around a bit. My husband and I, we travel around the world quite a bit, but Australia is our base, is our home, and always has been for me. My upbringing was sometimes it's a little bit unusual for people. I was brought up in a quite, I wouldn't say poor household, but a very basic upbringing on the East Coast. So it was the kind of upbringing that made me very grateful for anything we did have. It was a real gratitude thing. We heard no a lot. We heard we can't, financially, we can't do this, or it's just not possible. And I think hearing words like that always made me, I guess inspired sounds too much for that young age, but it made me want to really, I guess, question it and go, really? Is it really impossible? And that got me asking why a lot. It got me questioning things and thinking, is it a hard yes or no? Is it a hard black and white? Or is there somewhere in the middle? And I think it's where my curiosity really started to say, okay, are you the environment that you're brought up in, or do you become who you choose to become? And for me, it was a big opportunity. And I was determined not to be my upbringing, not to be my environment. And that pushed me that little bit harder to stand up. And I guess that's where my fascination in emotional intelligence came from. And that's where my approach comes from, that tough love approach too, because it's sometimes we're not in the best environment. Sometimes we don't have the opportunities handed to us. But once you accept that it's your choice, it comes down to choice. And if you want something bad enough, you'll make it happen regardless of the circumstances. You'll find a way. And that's where I really push today to truly own it and work out it. Don't let somebody else's decision be your decision of who you are. You always have a choice. And sometimes that's only choosing how you emotionally respond to the situation, but the choice is still there.
That's a beautiful and hopeful perspective on the choices we have, including on our emotions. Now, would love to
Mhm.
get your thoughts on when we talk about emotional intelligence. What is it? Do we have a certain level and then we can work on it? Or is it all developed based on our desires? Where do you come down on that?
It's absolutely a mixture of everything that you've just said, Mahan. I do believe absolutely we are born with a level of emotional intelligence, the same as we're born with a level of every part of ourselves. But I do believe that emotional intelligence is a skill. So let's just, as we talk about this, I just want to do a really clear separation between emotional intelligence and mental health, because there is definitely a difference. So the stuff that I'm speaking about is we're going to go more with the 80-20 rule, right? We're talking about 80% of the population. We're talking about people that are neurodiverse. So neurodiverse situations are extremely different. It's different wiring. It's different when it's coming into the mental health side. So when we're looking at that 80% rule, emotional intelligence is a skill. So when we look at kids do emotional intelligence really quite well, and we see it in our primary schools, we see the focus on understanding how you're making somebody else feel, understanding how you're feeling in that moment, what emotions are coming with it. And these emotions are coming off our values, our beliefs, our environment, all of that kind of stuff. So when you look at the mind, we are wired with these values, these beliefs, these environment. everything that we've been brought up in determines what we believe is acceptable. And that's why we can see the difference across cultures, across, as you said, with the twin situation out there. These values and beliefs drive what we do and what we choose is right and wrong and how far we push ourselves. But is that a hard limitation on what we're capable of? No, it's not. It's the it's the limitations and beliefs that we've created in our mind. Now, for some of us, for our whole life, we will limit ourselves within that area because those are our values and beliefs. That is what we've been brought up in. That is our environment. And that is where we will remain. However, there is always the opportunity, emotional intelligence, because it's a skill, you can learn it. You can learn it like any other skill. And like any other skill, you're not going to get it perfect every time. So I teach this kind of stuff. I would never, ever call myself emotionally intelligent because in every situation, we have a choice to either respond in an emotionally intelligent way or not to respond in an emotionally intelligent way. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we get it very wrong. And the power of our mind and our wiring is always going to default to whatever is embedded stronger. So if you look at my background, as I was saying, was it easy to break through and choose to become someone different, choose a different path? No, it wasn't at all. And I can absolutely appreciate that in some situations, it is extremely tough, right? There are some people that battle to get out of that area. But when I say we've always got a choice, as I said, sometimes it is purely our emotional response that comes down to that choice, right? In how much am I going to let this define me? How much am I going to decide whether, yes, this is my value and belief and I'm staying in that space? I grew up in an environment where they told me that this was right and this was acceptable and this is what home life looked like. So therefore, that's it. That is what it's going to be. Or am I going to be curious and find out what else is out there in the world? What other forms of home life, what other forms of growing up, what other forms of being a decent human being looks like? And will I challenge that theory? Will I get curious and will I find a different way and push myself? And I think this is no different from being in the workplace, being in a home environment, being in our upbringing. It's that curiosity, it's that choice, it's that ability to be able to challenge your own mind. And our mind is extremely strong with all of those neural pathways that are in there. But we always have the ability, and we've seen it throughout history, that you can have a group of people grow up in exactly the same environment and have different beliefs, different values. You can have people, some of the most incredible people in this world, come out of the same environments and the same backgrounds and the same beliefs, values, and beliefs as some of the people that have done some of the most horrendous things in this world. So yes, they play a factor. What you were born with, the nature and nurture, yes, it all definitely plays a factor. But there is also a very big factor in there too of choice and of learning and of how you apply it and how you're showing up. And I think that is my love for emotional intelligence, because I think we forget about that it is also an element of influence. It's not a black and white. It's there, it's a choice. And along with you choosing your environment, along with you choosing your values and beliefs and everything like that, you can choose how you emotionally respond. You can choose to be emotionally intelligent. So there are some people I think that are just blessed. There's some people that I meet that I just think, oh my goodness, you are just naturally so emotionally intelligent. And a lot of the time these people don't even realize it. And people are like, how do I become you? How do I be more like you? And they're like, I don't know. Isn't this normal? But there are other people who have come through their life that I meet that really lack that emotional intelligence, that we can open up that different areas of their mind to see things slightly different. And as I said, is it easy? No, it's not. But have they improved their emotional intelligence? Yes, they absolutely have. And that's that first step of coming from that self-awareness of understanding what makes you tick, why that makes you tick, and what are those values and embedded beliefs that are guiding you, those neural pathways, those habits that are guiding you to choose to respond like that.
Self-awareness is really important, and I want to touch on that, Amy. But before that, I also love the way you frame it as something that can be developed because one of the challenges I've seen, whether it's been in recruiting or sometimes in leaders coaching their team members, they say that person lacks emotional intelligence
Mhm.
as if they are doomed to always lack emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
What you are saying is, sure, our environment has an impact on us. There are genetic elements that contribute to it. That said, like any other skill, we can also develop there. So
Yeah.
if someone on the team is lower on emotional intelligence, they're not doomed forever to be low on emotional intelligence. Through coaching, through support, through feedback, through increasing some of the self awareness that you just mentioned,
Mhm.
they can go on and develop greater emotional intelligence. So I think it's important not only for us to keep it in mind for ourselves that we can develop greater emotional intelligence, but also for the people we coach and who
Exactly.
report to us, they can develop greater emotional intelligence as well.
That's right. And certainly when I go into organizations and when I work with, especially your executive teams or people in leadership roles, I'll always give them a fair assessment at the end to say, okay, here are your pockets of people that have natural high emotional intelligence or that are applying their emotional intelligence really well. Here are a couple of your people that are causing quite a bit of contagious negative or lacking emotional intelligence. And some of those people, I will say, we can help this person because the self awareness is there and they want to improve. This person over here very much lacks emotional intelligence and they're not ready. They are not ready to be self aware and they don't want to change. And it's not that they can't change, it's that they're just choosing to be really straight down that line. So there are some people, and look, it takes a fair bit for me to say, unfortunately, now's not the right time. I can't help them. But there certainly are going to be people, and I think we've all worked with people like that before. We've come across people like that before. We know people in the world like that. And it's not a never, it's just a they're not ready or they're not willing because you cannot force somebody to be emotionally intelligent. They've got to want to do it. They've got to have that desire and they've got to have that level of awareness in order to be able to change it. If they can't see it, if they're not agreeing with it and you've tried from every single angle, then there comes a point where you've got to say, it's not going to happen now. So you've got to choose to either, and this is again that choice thing in a leader role, you've either got to choose to accept that this is what this person is going to be, who they're going to be, the way they're going to respond, and this is what they're going to bring to your workplace. You've got to decide, are you happy with that or are you not? Is it acceptable or is it not? Because it's not going to change in the near future. So you need to make a choice because they're not going to change. You've got to accept them for who they are.
Yeah, so that awareness that you also mentioned this is critical. Now, interestingly, my episode on January 6th, episode 429, was with Les Chorba. His book is Aware, and he also talks about how we need greater self-awareness in leadership. Many leaders, though, I'm sure vast majority of my listeners, we all believe we are self-aware. Where do you see that belief breaking down, especially when it comes to emotional intelligence?
It is very common for me to walk into a program and to speak to people first. And it's something that I do quite often is to walk in and get people to really think about their levels of emotional intelligence, to self-reflect. What are their drivers? What are they getting out of bed for? What makes them tick? Really, what is their wiring? And quite often I'll have people that are very confident that their self-aware is quite high and they know who they are and they know how it works. And by the end of even one day, having them measure it again and see how much their scores have dropped. And not because they've become less emotionally intelligent during the day or less self aware, but because they've become more self aware and they've realized just the level that they truly at, not where they believe they're at. And it's those simple things, right? Like one of my favorite activities to do, and this kind of speaks a lot to leadership and self awareness, is I have a deck of cards. There's 40 different cards in there, and every card has a great leadership quality that's on there. And they've got a very set small amount of time limit as a team, as a table, to pull out the 5 most important leadership skills that anybody can have. So you can imagine the leadership that's required within that for a table of 8 to 10 people to agree on the top 5 leadership skills. And every leadership skill on every one of those 40 cards is very important. And this feeling of self-awareness, one of the best ways that I can break through for people is that we hold quite high expectations for the people around us. And we're very aware of what makes a great leader. Rocket science, everyone knows what makes a great leader. It is very simple. It's very 101. And when they pick these cards, and every table tends to have different ones, but they all overlap and everyone agrees, what makes a great leader. And then I get them to actually score themselves based on those 5 cards, given that they've picked them as the most important leadership skills. And they simply just score themselves out of 5. And to this day, as much as expected, I've never had anybody that scored themselves 5 out of 5 in all 5 cards. There's always been somebody that's just slightly below that. I'd be worried if there was somebody who rated themselves 5 out of 5 for all cards. So luckily it hasn't happened. But even at that point where they're thinking very external, this is what I expect from my leaders, and this is what I expect from the people around us. When you start looking internally with those same expectations and we ask ourselves, how are you not a 5 out of 5 as a leader for even 5 of these cards, let alone 40 of them? And they're like, of course I can't be. Amy, of course. What kind of stupid question is that? Of course I can't be a 5 out of 5. Yet our expectations on the people around us is a 5 out of 5 for all 40 of those cards every second of every day, because you're a leader and you should be at that level. But when we start to do that, to expose that external expectation and awareness levels right beside our internal self-awareness and expectation levels, is where we start to break through and see, maybe I'm not as self-aware as I thought. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought. Maybe I am holding myself to very different standards to what I'm holding other people to, because I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm a human being. I'm always going to make mistakes. There's always room for growth. But when I look at other people, I expect you to be perfect. I expect you to be, you're a leader. You should know better. You are getting paid to do this, right? But me, I'm a human being. Of course I'm going to get it wrong. I'm still learning. No one's perfect. So I think even for those people that are so determined that they are self-aware, it's when we start to really get them thinking about what's driving them, their expectations, the beliefs that they have in their head, and just simply how they communicate, how they interact with other people. It's then that they start to realize, maybe I haven't got this 100% perfect. Maybe there is that space. And that to me is the power of emotional intelligence. It's my job to work out who in the room or who listening is not 100% on board with this. And how do I even say one thing that makes them take a step back and go, oh, that hit a bit hard, or, oh, what is she saying there? I don't like it. But the more I think about it, okay, it has got me questioning things. And I think that's the power of emotional intelligence. It's not always having the answer. It's not always knowing the answer, but it's hearing something that makes you stop and think, wow, that's slightly different to what I've always thought. And how can I improve who I am, or how can I influence this situation by simply changing a little bit of my communication or my awareness or my interaction or my regulation.
It's interesting, Amy. It takes a certain level of self awareness that requires a disconnect from the ongoing rush of things we have to do to focus in on. So there has to be that self reflection that is critical to leadership that I find fewer of us are taking time to do because we have overcrowded schedules,
Mhm.
priorities, all of those things. But what I hear from you is if we want to increase our emotional intelligence, we do need to take that time for some of that reflection in order to increase our awareness, which by itself impacts our emotional intelligence.
Exactly right. And look, I am not a neuroscientist background. I am not from that space. And I highly respect the people out there that have done the most amazing research so that we can understand it. But it's my role to be that kind of that conduit in between, right? Because there's a big difference between a neuroscientist and a leader on the front line. You've got to be able to be that conduit to bring that research, to bring that study into a language that leaders on the front line can align to what they're doing and bring it today. And it's being able to help them understand the difference between the subconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious mind, to know when they're sitting in their subconscious mind as opposed to they're sitting in their conscious mind. And it is that, as you said, we live in a busy world, right? And we live in a world where it's so acceptable to always put the responsibility on somebody else or to put the blame on things like lack of time or I'm too busy or I can't do this. So it is that challenge to be able to get people to understand, okay, what is happening in my mind? What is the natural default that our mind goes to? And how once I start to understand, that is when you start to take control of it because you can choose and you can have that reflection inside to go, okay, I am 100% driven by my emotions right now. There is no logic in play. How do I engage my logical brain? How do I bring that logic into play right now? And that might mean stopping and taking a few deep breaths. That might be allowing time for that emotional hijack to pass or that chemical response in our brain and our bodies to pass so that I can bring logic into it. The more I think we can help people to understand what is happening in our mind and how we are wired, the more we start to take control of that because you can't change the wiring of our minds, right? As I said, I teach this kind of stuff. I still have emotional hijacks and I will forever have emotional hijacks. But it's how I cope and how I deal in that situation. That's what I've got control over.
Now, you focus your work and your book on mastering change and difficult conversations. Why focus on those two?
So, this is my second book out. My first book was very much the fundamental basics of emotional intelligence. It was a very easy read. It was that internal look to go, what are those really small one percenters that I can do right now today that will improve my emotional intelligence? This book here is a lot more detailed and it is a lot more specific to leaders, to the workplace environment. And the reason why I focus on change and difficult conversations is these are the two areas that we tend to avoid the most as leaders. These are also the two areas that as human beings we tend to avoid as well, even our personal lives as well, because it is a struggle. And when we look at how fast paced this world is changing and how incredible the technology is that's coming through and the size of change. So we know there's change has been here for as long as we've been here, right? But the change that we're up against today is at a larger scale and a more intense a higher intensity than it's ever been. They're not small changes, they are huge changes. And why these two areas are so important is because they often go hand in hand. Because when we roll out any form of change, and this is happening in workplaces constantly, right? This level of change. When we're doing this, it's like an alarm bell that's going off in people's minds that is saying all of these neural pathways in this wiring that I have in my head is telling me that this is how I handle this situation, or this is how I do this process, or this is what I do when that first trigger happens. And all of a sudden, when you have people in front of you saying, no, don't do it that way anymore, do it this way, we know deep down that a habit takes quite a while to rewire, to re-embed. Yet in the workplace, what we're doing is we're creating change daily, like large amounts and huge scale change. And we're expecting people to jump straight on board with it. We're expecting people to rewire their minds in a matter of seconds and be happy and love it. And this is a big problem. We are seeing so much change around the world that is not successful. And it's not because the change itself is not good or hasn't been thought out well. It's because people's acceptance of the change is not there. And if people don't get on board and accept the change, then it fails. And this is the area that I believe as leaders, we're truly lacking. We are expecting everybody to have a relationship with change where they love change. And you will have people in your team, you'll have people in your life. There'll be people like you and I that I know my relationship with change. I love change, but that's not always a good thing. So if I was one of your employees, you're going to have me coming up to you constantly going, what if we do this? Or what if we improved it this way? Or I've been doing this job now for 2 years. Surely it's time for a promotion. People that love change, there's so many good elements to that, but there's also some not so good elements. And you need people in your workplaces that have a relationship with change that is very low, that they love consistency. They love coming in, day out, doing the same thing over and over again. And they're really good at it and they're happy to do it. And those people, the reason why they're like that is because their relationship with change is very low and they love consistency. So to expect those people to turn around and jump on board and get excited about a change that you're rolling out goes against every reason why you have them in your team. So this is why I've focused on change, because I think for so long, change management isn't new, right? Change management has been out there for decades now. But it's very process driven and it doesn't give space for the emotional intelligence portion that comes into change. And we are still driving change by process rather by people, by our mind, by the understanding of how it comes together. So this change intelligence piece is so important to me. It's just this passion, right? And with that change, when change intelligence is not done well, what happens is many difficult conversations come up. And then we tend to avoid them as well. And we're like, oh, we'll just brush that under the carpet. Or they'll be right. Or what are you getting so worked up about? Everyone else is fine with it. Why aren't you fine with it? It's you, it's not me. So being able to bring these two elements together was such a natural alignment. And I think that when you start to break down and when you start to get into my book and understand that change isn't always something that you've set up an initiative or project for, it might be as simple as changing somebody's work hours by half an hour. It might be as simple as you come into work expecting you're going to do this and this today, and all of a sudden something has happened and you've got to switch your mind. That's change, right? So when we first think change in difficult conversations, we think extremity. But when you start to look at it, every part of our day in the workplace is based on things changing and conversations that might not be a yes, you can have everything that you want. Yes, it's going to work. So these two elements, I think this book could have been 5 times the size that it is. So to even try and keep it to this size was quite difficult. But I think if you as a leader can get these two areas, it is going to impact the whole 80-20, right? It's going to impact 80% of what you're doing day in, day out.
It is absolutely critical. And I love the way you describe the fact that there are a lot of things that we don't want people to change. So when there's a frustration, why don't they want to change? It's why don't they want to change with what I want them to change? Because
That's
there is a
right.
lot that we don't want them to change on. So I
Yeah.
love that framing of it. And the second one is, it was funny, back in December, I was in a meeting, a CEO was talking about change initiative and was talking about using Cotter's 8 steps. Credit to John Cotter, who I had on the podcast. His latest book on change focused primarily on the human element. John Cotter himself says that the burning platform terrifies people. And when people clam
Yeah.
up and get terrified, they are unwilling to go along with change. So John Cotter has changed his mind on what it takes to make change happen, which relates and connects better to what you say as well. From your perspective, then, Amy, in what way can we be more emotionally intelligent in
Hmm.
leading change?
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned Cotter's model as well, because there are so many fantastic change models out there. And a lot of the inspiration from my model actually came from the Bridges model, which is an extremely old model as well. And I think probably in the past and even in the history of workplaces, I don't think got big enough exposure, because I think the Bridges model had really tapped into that transition of our mind and around that people space. So really, when I look at the model that I've brought to life, and I'll talk about some of those important parts, it's about bringing the emotional intelligence side and the emotional intelligence process into that Bridges theory around the transition that our mind must go through, those 3 stages. So for me, the most, probably the biggest takeaway, most important thing that a leader or any person can do when it comes to change is to understand that there is never, ever going to be a change that is perfect. Never. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing. And the reason why I say that is because every time a change occurs, our mind will always lose something. And I think that when it comes to change, we are so focused on wanting people to love it. We sell it. We sell the good parts of it. It's going to be amazing. It's so much better than the old way. You're going to love this. It's going to be easier. It's going to be quicker. It's going to be better. It's new technology. It's a new building. It's whatever it is. And you will have read in my book the example, which I think is such an example that everyone can relate to. It's that whole winning lottery, right? Winning that $400 million in lottery and thinking change doesn't get much better than that. Like $400 million. That even when you look at a change like that, you lose a lot of things. And it's not until you stop to really think about the fact that if you just won $400 million, how motivated are you to get out of bed every morning? What is your purpose? What is your meaning? What is your drive? What are your goals? You lose a lot of goals. Those goals will probably change to a 40-foot yacht for a while and a mansion and stuff like that. But at what point do you then go, I've got it all. What is my purpose now? You lose relationships, you lose friendships, you lose that chance of being isolated or not known. There is so much that with every change, as soon as you're looking to change a neural pathway in somebody's mind, whether you believe it is a good change or not, their mind will go through a withdrawal. It will go through a loss. It'll go through, I know it sounds extreme, but it's like a grieving stage, right? In that every day I've got up and I've done it this way and I'm comfortable with that and I feel confident in that area. And sometimes what they're losing is confidence or feeling like an expert in an area. And I think when we don't acknowledge that the change is not going to be perfect, that there will be things that, especially in that workplace when we say, okay, we're currently with A and we're going to go to B and B is so much better. There will be, the minute you say that, people will find that one area that B is not better than A, and they will tell you, and they'll focus on it. They'll latch onto it. They're like, but you said it was better, but what about this? And 90% of B might be better because that's why you've decided to change there, right? Because B, when we go through change, we weigh it up and we go the pros and the cons, which one ours outweighs. So it's not really perfect, but we know that it is 90% better than what we have. So we're going to go with that. But if you hide that 10% and if you try not to acknowledge that 10%, people will latch onto it and they will show you every one of those 10% that is not better. And it is that defiant part of our mind that is saying, don't tell me that I'm wrong. Don't tell me that the way that I've always done it is wrong and that there is a better way. I need you to understand what is happening in my mind. And I have lost comfort. I have lost confidence. I am creating a new neural pathway in my mind, and that's going to take time. So your song and dance about how good B is going to be is not going to cut it for me right now. Just let me process it.
Is it just recognizing it and calling it out? Is that enough? Or does there need to be more than that?
It depends on the size of the change. It depends on the person. But that is ultimately what you are doing in that first step, is creating the moment to pause, creating the moment to self-reflect, to think about, how am I feeling about this? Why am I feeling about this? And how do I get that kind of, because you pretty much, you're shutting down a neural pathway in your mind and recreating a new one. So how do I get that closure on that moment? How do I get that piece of understanding of what is happening in my mind right now? Because there are 50 different alarm bells going off saying something's happening. I'm not sure if we're on board with this. Where are we? So yes, sometimes it is as simple as being able to say, we know that there are some fantastic parts of A that have been around for the last 25, 30 years. And you may have entered your working career and only ever known A. And that's good. And you might not be happy with A, but it's all, and there is that opportunity to stop and say, before we get rid of A that we've complained about for every day for the last 5 years, let's just acknowledge that A has got us through this far. It's that whole thing. It's the example I use in my book around those buildings, right? Like I've seen organizations that have got teams in the most run down buildings. I don't even know how they're passing OH&S. They've got leaking roofs. That everything is so terrible, and people are complaining about it every single day, going, this is ridiculous. How could you expect us to work in here? And they create the most beautiful looking new building and talk about how exciting it is. But they forget the fact that person who's worked at the company for 30 years every day has got up and has taken the same route to work, has gone to the same coffee shop every time they've walked outside, has sat at the same desk. And even though they hate that desk, they've sat at that same desk. So asking them to love and jump straight into all of these new things that their mind is trying to comprehend. How do I get to this new location? How do I get to this new office? How am I going to find a new local coffee shop? And it's not about solving those problems for them. It's about talking about it. It's about talking about the fact that, yes, we do have an amazing new building and it's going to be brilliant. The technology is next level and it doesn't leak and it's decent. But also, your mind is going to struggle a little bit with the fact that you are going to lose your favorite barista. Gosh, I hope it's not barista. That your favorite barista, your favorite coffee shop, the same bus or the same road that you drove to work every day. There is going to be change and your mind is going to struggle a little bit with it. So let's help you to create that. Let's help you through that little phase. And if it's a big change, it is going to take a little bit more than a conversation. If it is a small change, a conversation is going to be plenty enough. It's going to be, you came in today thinking you were going to do this. Actually, I need you to do this instead. I know that this isn't great. How are you feeling about this right now? What can I do to support it? I know it's thrown your day out and there's some things that you're not going to be able to do now that you plan to do. How do we approach this? What's the best way to do this? How do we make this work? Sometimes it's as simple as that.
And that is so different than the way a lot of leaders communicate change, Amy. They focus primarily on the positive, and if there is any resistance, hesitation, or questions, they overwhelm with even more positive and then get frustrated. Why can't people see, using your example, we're going from this Class C dumpy building to this Class A beautiful building, and they still find reasons to complain. So
Exactly.
that frustration gets
Yeah.
them to say, come on, can't you see it?
Yeah.
As opposed to recognizing the point that you made about loss. Daniel Kahneman had done brilliant research on how loss impacts us, even loss that to others might seem meaningless.
Exactly.
Therefore, recognizing it, being transparent about it, helps emotionally connect and understand what people are going through. It doesn't necessarily change the decision. However, that's what that emotional intelligence that you talk about is all about.
Yeah, that's right. And you see it everywhere around you. Like, we're watching a TV series, my husband and I at the moment, Berlin Station. Not sure if you've seen it, but it's a kind of show that gets you hooked. And even watching an episode last night and watching these two really high profile people fight for the whole season. We got to the final episode of the season and they have been doing everything to tear each other down. And at that final season, final episode, somebody just saying to them, just back off, just take a step back and actually maybe instead of telling them what to do, ask them how they feel about it or ask for their input. And this happens with human beings everywhere, with change, with everything, with difficult conversations, to simply just reframe. Because what was happening in this situation is it was that threat of power, and therefore they felt like they were losing control. They were losing status. Both of them felt like they were losing control. They were losing status. They were fighting for that power feeling. But then when they worked out, oh, actually, maybe if we just do this together, hello, this is a fundamental basics, right? But unfortunately, even though it is the fundamental basics, every day we see leaders do it. Every day we see people do it. And they're not considering what the person in front of them is losing when they're approaching the situation in that way. You can't force people to feel a feeling. And the more that you force people to feel a certain way or to love something, the more they're going to push back on it. Because don't tell me how to feel.
Amy, I've been into AI, its operational application, strategic implications for quite a while. And with some clients, I've been working with them, and I've seen in clients and in other organizations frustration with the level of people embracing AI, using AI. What you are saying here connects directly to any level of change in the organization.
Yeah.
You can convince people that there won't be any layoffs. It's just going to be a tool for augmentation. It's going to make your job easier. It's going to take out the tedious parts of the job. Can just list positive after positive. If we don't take the time to emotionally understand what is changing for people, what are they losing as a result of this, be transparent about it, call it out, recognize it before moving on, there will continue to be resistance. So the point that you're making about this emotional intelligence and the role it plays in change, I find it so relevant in any level of change in organizations.
Yeah, I was doing a session with a large group and it was the top tier executives and leaders, and awesome group of people, really awesome group of people, very engaged, very, very ready to improve their emotional intelligence. And I remember at the first break, he was the chief technology officer. He came up to me and he said, Amy, I'm loving this. This is brilliant. This is really, everyone's engaged. This is really what we want to hear. He said, is there any chance that throughout the rest of the session you could squeeze in something about AI and get them on board with AI? He said, because I am just getting so much pushback. And like at this point, right, and this is where my curiosity comes into play. And I said, oh, really? I said, who are you seeing the most pushback from? And when he started to list these people, and I said, talk to me, how are you engaging these people? And mind you, we'd already started going through and he was fantastic. His EI was there. I could see him. But even though he was listening to what I was saying and he was on board, he still wasn't relating it to what he was doing, because the more I spoke to him, I said, okay, so what I'm hearing here is your biggest pushback is somebody that's been at the company for 20 years and is currently the expert at the current process. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So what do you think this person is going to lose by you bringing in a brand new process that they're not the expert on, that they haven't been doing for 20 years, that they're not the go-to person in the workplace that knows everything about this process? I said, do you really think it's just the fact that it's AI that they're pushing back on this, or do you think it's something a little bit deeper? Have you got them involved earlier? Have you helped them to be able to play around and become a little bit of a specialist in this space? Because if you're asking them to go from being the expert of 20 years, 20, 25 years in this space to being a learner like every other person around them, it's probably not going to sit well with them. So it's even when we understand this kind of stuff, and I think this is what I spoke earlier about, this is about bridging the gap, right, between we can have executives read the most academic books and the most detailed research on neuroscience and understand the way the mind works. And they can read it and go, yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I've learned so much from that. But then walk into the workplace an hour later and do the exact opposite of what they've just read because they didn't have the ability to be able to apply it into their everyday situation exactly like this CTO was doing. He was not seeing the alignment between it to say, everything you've just said to me you love about this session, you're also telling me that you're doing the exact opposite and you don't understand why people are not getting on board. Let's connect these areas because this is life. This is what's happening day in, day out. And this is where we need to start.
Absolutely. And Amy, it's a different mindset about leadership as well, in that this is leadership with engagement, leadership with the recognition of the power residing in the individuals within the team and organization, rather than leadership the way it was viewed previously, where the power resided on top, and therefore that's the way things work. So I do think it's a combination of a change in leadership mindset as well as the approach that you're talking about. Now, one of the other things that you also go into in your book, which I appreciate because so many of us and so many leaders avoid those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
In what ways can emotional intelligence play a role so we don't avoid the difficult conversations? We still have them, but they go better.
Yeah. These difficult conversations, I think I'm yet to meet somebody in this world who loves a difficult conversation. And I think even like I'm very open to a difficult conversation, but do I get that anxious feeling beforehand? Do I start to think, how is this going to go? How are they going to react? And that's completely normal, completely normal. Yes, we still need to have these conversations. And especially at leadership, you're going to have a lot of difficult conversations. The advantage to bringing emotional intelligence is into a difficult conversation is to get a better outcome for everyone involved and to get there faster. Because when you have a difficult conversation that lacks emotional intelligence, quite often, if I take a step back, actually, quite often when going into a difficult conversation, we are the one that makes it difficult before the other person even enters the conversation. Because what tends to happen is when we are entering into a difficult conversation, our fight or flight, our amygdala, activates in our mind because we are going into an unknown situation or a situation that might not be completely comfortable with us. So what happens is that fight or flight mechanism kicks in. And what we tend to do is we tend to over prepare. We're like, how can we protect ourselves in this situation? And that's coming from our fight or flight, right? And what we tend to do as leaders is we go in like ready to take control of the situation or be strong and push hard. Or we go in armed with all this ammunition around these statistics, these reports, these examples of why we're right and why they're wrong. Rather than entering in to a conversation between two human beings and allowing them the chance to not lose every part of their pride and allowing them the chance not to go into defense mode, into that fight response in their mind when they're coming into it. So even if I relate it to the conversation that we're having, right? Had we have come into this podcast this morning, nighttime for you, morning for me, had we have come into this podcast and you had very structured questions, right? Where you asked a question, I gave a yes or no answer, a one sentence response. The quality of this conversation would be a lot less than coming in, opening up with some questions and then following my emotions, following my thoughts, following my passion, and vice versa, and bouncing off each other. It's a very different conversation. If you go into a difficult conversation with the script pre-done in your head, with the assumptions already there of what you think of that person, why you think they did it, why you think they're not capable, then it is not going to be a quality conversation. You already know the outcome that you're looking for. You're pretty much just delivering it. And don't get me wrong, in some situations, that is what is required. When somebody has pushed too many boundaries or they've done something really wrong or inappropriate, that is the conversation that is required. Straight down the line. There is no roundabout here. Same as interviews with politicians, stuff like that. There's a big difference between a podcast conversation and an interview or an interrogation. There is a big difference in a difficult conversation between going in with an open mind and understanding what has led to this point, what is driving it, and being able to focus on how the person is emotionally feeling in that conversation to get a better outcome. And what I mean by this is that one of the most common difficult conversations we have is on performance. So people that are underperforming. Now, there are several reasons why somebody could be underperforming. Several reasons. They might be underperforming because they do not have the skill level. They might be underperforming because they might not have received the training. So maybe they do have the skill level, but they haven't been exposed to the training. They might be underperforming because they are bored out of their brain and they don't want to be here. They might be underperforming because they are very nasty or vindictive and are actually doing it on purpose to try and come from a different angle. And if you go into that conversation making some assumptions, you're going to go in with an outcome in mind that might not be the right outcome. Because when you walk into that conversation, the difference in that conversation of understanding, okay, how are we here? Why are we here? What is it that you don't love about your job? Do you enjoy your job? How do you think you're going in this position? Because there's a big difference and a very different path to take for an underperformer that says, oh, I'm doing great. What are you talking about? I'm your star person, when they're clearly not, compared to somebody who's saying, actually, now that you mention it, I am really struggling. I feel like my head's underwater and maybe I'm a bit out of my depth and maybe this isn't the right job for me. Those two conversations should go in very different places. But unfortunately, when we go into the difficult conversation, we go in with statements rather than questions and assumptions rather than looking to understand. And that's what makes it so much more difficult, because when you go in like that, you are emotionally triggering the other person's amygdala and they are going to come out fighting as well. It's like you're backing them into a corner. And sometimes everything that you're saying is extremely relevant, yet they will tell you, they will fight and fight to tell you that the sky is green, even though you've got every proof on paper and every example to say, actually, the sky is blue. Because you've backed them into a corner, their fight or flight mechanism will fight and tell you, no, it's green. And let me tell you why it's green. So you can continue to go into difficult conversations without focusing on emotion and without bringing emotional intelligence in there. And I have no doubt that you can still run an organization like that. But the culture and the type of organization that you're going to run is going to be very different than the outcomes that you will get when you start to bring emotional intelligence into difficult conversations. Because a difficult conversation with emotional intelligence tends to decrease how many times you have that conversation. It tends to decrease the amount of actions that you have out of that, because you build up that person's ownership in the role that they've played in the situation and you get them on board. And it also makes it a lot easier for people to part ways, because sometimes that is the outcome that both parties are looking for. That person is in the wrong job, or, they're not capable of the job. And it is a lot easier to move somebody on when they also accept the fact that this probably isn't the right job for me. My pride is still in place and you're helping me to move on, rather than fighting you tooth and nail because their pride is so smashed and they're so embarrassed in that situation. And the way that you're speaking to them and what you're putting them through is only making the embarrassment more intense, rather than giving them the opportunity to just quietly walk away.
And the vast majority of difficult conversations aren't at that level necessarily, but your point is, even when that's the case, when you approach it with emotional intelligence, it's much more likely for the person to be open to it
That's right. It is, I think that is the key to success of being a human being. It's the key to success of workplaces, right? It's finding that balance between EQ and IQ. How do you bring both of them together? Because one alone is not enough. IQ is only going to take you so far before emotional intelligence or your EQ needs to step in. But the same thing, emotional intelligence is only going to take you so far before your IQ needs to step in as well. It is that balance in between, and it's the ability to be able to jump in between and read the situation, read the other person, read the emotional brain and the logical brain. That's what's going to get you the success.
It is absolutely critical, and I love the points that you made and the points that you've shared in the book. For the audience to find your book and also follow your writing and work, where would you send them to, Amy?
Head straight to my website. That's the hub of that will lead you everywhere. So my website is amyjacobson.com.au. And from there, you can find links to my book. You can find a lot of articles, a lot of insights that I put up, and links to all of my social media as well. Even in the States, though, you will find my book in majority of bookstores, so online and in bricks and mortar shops as well.
I so appreciate the conversation, Amy. And your book, The Emotional Intelligence Advantage, Mastering Change and Difficult Conversations. Thank you so much, Amy Jacobson.
It has been my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and have a good night.